My brother got my fiance pregnant. My family blamed me, so I cut them all off. Growing up, everyone in our family knew who the favorite was. It wasn't openly discussed, but it was obvious in every aspect of our lives, and the favorite wasn't me. I'm 32 now, and my younger brother, Mike, is 29, but the dynamic in our family has never changed from the earliest days. I could see how differently we were treated. If Mike broke something, like the time he shattered Mom's favorite vase, it somehow became my fault. "You're the older brother," they'd say. "You should have stopped him." I didn't break the vase. I wasn't even in the room when it happened, but that didn't matter. Mike was too young to understand the consequences of his actions, so the responsibility fell on me. If we both achieved something, his accomplishments always seemed bigger. I remember in 5th grade, I won a math competition. My mom briefly said, "Good job," and went back to making dinner. But when Mike got a participation award for a soccer tournament, they threw a celebratory dinner and invited all their friends. "You're not upset, are you?" Mom asked. "Mike worked so hard for this. He's younger and needs the encouragement." That was their standard excuse. Mike was younger, Mike was more sensitive, Mike had it harder, and me, I was the older brother. I was supposed to understand this. This didn't stop when we got older. When I got into a prestigious university on a scholarship, my parents barely reacted. They didn't visit to see my dorm or help with the move. I remember packing up on my own, getting on the bus, and feeling that bitter realization. It was like my achievements didn't matter to them. But when Mike got into a local community college, it was a different story. They threw a party, invited friends, and even bought him a car. "He worked so hard for this," Dad said. "They didn't buy me a car. I rode my bike 5 miles to work and saved every penny to pay for textbooks." Mike dropped out of college after the first semester, and they weren't even disappointed. "Don't worry, sweetheart," Mom said. "You just need time to find your path." After that, they started funding all his business ventures. He opened an online store that went bankrupt in 3 months, then tried creating an app but never finished the development. Eventually, he got into selling sports gear, which also failed. I watched as my parents poured thousands of dollars into his failures. Once, I asked why they kept supporting him, and Mom just waved her hand dismissively. "Mike hasn't found himself yet. He's so talented. We need to help him figure it out." But I never got that kind of support. I paid for my education, worked after classes, and when I asked for a little help, I got the same response. "You're independent. This is good for you. It'll make you stronger." I'd like to say it didn't bother me, but it did. No matter how hard I tried, it always felt like I was never enough, like I'd never be good enough, not for them, and maybe not for anyone else. That difference in treatment left a mark. It made me doubt my worth and question if I could ever truly measure up. And then Sarah came into my life. We met at a party hosted by one of Mike's friends. I almost didn't go because I was exhausted from work, but Mike insisted. "Come on, relax a little. There will be cool people there." Sarah immediately caught my attention. She had this natural charisma that lit up the entire room. She was laughing at some silly story, and her laugh was so contagious that I couldn't help but smile, even though I didn't know what she was laughing about. We struck up a conversation by the drink table. She asked if I was one of Mike's friends. I told her I was his older brother. "Oh, interesting," she said with a playful smirk. "Mike's never mentioned you. Why are you hiding?" That conversation was easy, yet meaningful. At some point, I realized I had shared more with her in an hour than I had with anyone in months. Sarah had this way of making people feel seen, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone truly listened to me. We started dating, and it was the best decision of my life. Everything with her felt natural and effortless. She supported me, celebrated my achievements, and for the first time, I felt valued, not for what I accomplished, but for who I was. A year later, we decided to move in together. It was a big step, but I was confident in us. We created our own little world in our apartment, evenings watching TV shows, late night talks in the kitchen, planning our future together. Those were the best years of my life. On our 4th anniversary, I decided I was ready to take the next step. I had been saving for months to buy a ring. I knew she'd love it. It was a simple platinum band with a small diamond, modest yet elegant, just like her style. That night, I was so nervous when I proposed. We were taking a walk in the park where we had our first kiss, and I got down on one knee. Sarah covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes welling up with tears. She said yes, and for the first time in my life, everything felt right. We decided not to rush the wedding. We wanted to save up and plan everything exactly how we dreamed, no loans or debts, just what we could afford. We both worked overtime, skipped vacations, and poured everything into our dream of a future together. When we announced our engagement, I thought my family would finally be happy for me. They always said I needed to find a good woman, but their reaction was underwhelming. My mom gave a strange smile and said, "Well, congratulations, I guess. I hope it works out." My dad muttered, "Good luck with that." And Mike? He stood in the corner with a strange smile on his face. It wasn't joy, it was something predatory, like he saw an opportunity. After that, Mike started showing an unusual interest in my relationship with Sarah. He would constantly find excuses to talk to her, ask strange questions, and make comments that left me uneasy. "You're lucky to have him, you know," he'd say. "Not everyone can handle someone so serious, or you could have found someone better, but hey, if you're comfortable, why not?" Sarah brushed it off as dumb jokes and laughed, while I tried not to pay attention. But every time he made those comments, I felt a chill. At the time, I thought Mike was just being his immature self, but now I see it was the beginning of something far worse. 4 months before the wedding, I started noticing changes in Sarah. She wasn't the same person who always laughed, supported me, and planned our future with excitement. She became distant, nervous, and it started to worry me. It all began with her phone. She spent more time on it than usual, and whenever I walked into the room, she'd quickly lock the screen or put it away. "Who are you texting so much?" I asked one day. "Work stuff," she replied curtly, not even looking at me. I wanted to trust her, but it was hard. Every time she came home late, my doubts grew. Her excuses sounded like she barely believed them herself. We stayed late at work, she'd say, but I couldn't ignore the faint smell of wine or the hint of men's cologne. Neither hers nor mine. I tried convincing myself it was just stress. We were both working overtime to save for the wedding, and I thought maybe that was affecting her. But deep down, a part of me knew something was wrong. A month after her behavior started changing, I noticed something else. Sarah began glowing in a way I hadn't seen before. She smiled more often, and her appetite shifted. It took me a few weeks to put it together, but when I did, it hit me like a ray of sunshine. Sarah was pregnant. This is destiny, I thought. I was over the moon. To me, it was a sign that our future was falling perfectly into place. I didn't tell her right away that I had figured it out. I wanted to wait for her to share the news. But when she finally sat down next to me one night, her face told a different story. Her eyes were brimming with tears, and her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice trembling. My heart stopped. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice breaking. And then, after a pause that felt like an eternity, she added, "But the baby isn't yours." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I heard them, but I couldn't process them. It was like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Sarah started talking, her voice breaking between sobs and guilt. She told me the baby was Mike's. I only caught fragments of her explanation. She said it started at our engagement party. Mike had cornered her while I was busy talking to guests. He told her she was making a mistake marrying me, that I didn't appreciate her, and that she deserved more. He said, "You don't value me." She cried that you'll never understand me the way he does. He preyed on her insecurities, manipulated her doubts until she believed him. I found out he promised her everything. He claimed I couldn't give her more attention, more love, a better life. I was stupid, she said. I don't know why I believed him. I couldn't listen anymore. Anger, betrayal, shock, it all bubbled inside me. I stood up and said, "Pack your things and leave." She stayed seated for a while, trying to say something, but I wasn't listening anymore. After she left, I called Mike. He picked up almost instantly, as if he had been waiting for my call. "What did you do?" I yelled. At first, he tried to downplay it as a drunken mistake, saying it was a one-time thing and didn't mean anything. But when I pressed harder, his tone shifted. "Maybe if you were a better fiancé, this wouldn't have happened," he said, and I felt my blood boil. I grabbed my keys and drove to his house, not thinking about what I'd do when I got there. When I arrived, I saw my parents standing outside waiting for me. As soon as I pulled up, my mom crossed her arms, and my dad let out a heavy sigh like he was already exhausted from the upcoming conversation. "We need to talk," my mom said, using that lecturing tone she'd used my whole life. I didn't even get a word out before she launched into it. "Mike told us everything. He didn't mean for this to happen. Sarah seduced him." I froze. "What?" I managed to blurt out. "She seduced him," my mom repeated as if that explained everything. "He's just a victim of the situation." A victim? My brother, who had knowingly destroyed my life, was now somehow a victim. "This isn't his fault," my dad chimed in. "You know how sensitive he is to these things." I stared at them in disbelief. Were they even listening to themselves? "He's my brother, not a child. He knew exactly what he was doing," I shouted, but they had already made up their minds. To them, Mike was blameless. They demanded that I forgive him because he's your brother. "Family is what matters most," my mom said, nodding as if it were an undeniable truth. "You can't let this ruin our family." Then she dropped the line that broke me. "You need to support Sarah and the baby. She's pregnant. You have a responsibility to help her through this." I could barely breathe from the rage. "Responsibility?" I nearly yelled. "This isn't my child, and after what they did, I owe them nothing." Mom looked offended, as if I had said something outrageous. "You're being too harsh. We all make mistakes," she said. "You're the older brother. You should set an example. Support them." Support them? I was so floored by their logic that I didn't even know how to respond. Over the next few days, they wouldn't leave me alone. Mom sent texts like, "We're all waiting for you to come to your senses. Mike feels terrible. He didn't mean to hurt you." Meanwhile, my dad called and said, "We all do stupid things. It's normal in families. Just talk to him." But the worst part was when they started involving other relatives. I began getting calls from aunts and uncles who didn't know the full story but were eager to share their opinions. "You have to forgive your brother," they said. "This is just family drama. Everyone goes through it." "She's pregnant," another relative said. "That baby's innocent. You have to think about the future." It seemed like no one understood, or wanted to understand, that I had been betrayed by two of the closest people in my life. My brother and my fiancé had destroyed everything, and my entire family had decided that I was the problem. "You're tearing this family apart," my mom screamed at me one day when I refused to talk to Mike and Sarah. "You're not giving them a chance to make things right." I lost all hope that they'd ever see how wrong they were. After hearing my parents tell me to forgive Mike and support Sarah, I knew I made the hard decision to cut them off entirely. The first step was changing my phone number. I didn't want to deal with their endless calls and messages blaming me for destroying the family. I moved out of the apartment Sarah and I had shared, found a new place, and started going to therapy. It wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't handle this chaos alone. But my family didn't take the hint. At first, they tried calling me from unknown numbers. When that didn't work, they started showing up outside my new home. One day, I saw my mom sitting in her car across the street, staring at my windows like she was hoping to catch a glimpse of me. I called the police, but she left before they arrived. When they realized I was avoiding them, they escalated their efforts. One afternoon, during my lunch break, I saw my mom and Mike standing in the office parking lot near my car. They were waving their arms, trying to get my attention. When I walked toward them, Mom shouted, "You can't ignore us. We're your family. We're your family." I tried walking past them, but she stepped into my path. "Your brother and his child need you." How can you be so heartless? I stopped, took a deep breath, and said as calmly as I could, that is not my child. I don't owe you anything. Leave. That's when Mike lost it. You're acting like a child, he yelled. You just can't handle someone being better than you. You've always been pathetic. I clenched my fists but didn't respond. I turned and walked back to the office while they continued shouting, drawing the attention of passers-by. But that wasn't the end. A few days later, one of my coworkers approached me with a concerned expression. Hey, is everything okay? She asked. Your mom came by and said you're refusing to help your family. I was stunned. It turned out my mom had come to the office, spinning stories about how I had abandoned my family and even showing coworkers pictures of Mike and Sarah. He's neglecting his responsibilities, she told one colleague. His brother is in such a tough spot, and he just turns his back on him. It was humiliating. They were trying to destroy my reputation to guilt me into submission. I realized things couldn't go on like this. The next day, I went to HR and explained everything. My employer was supportive and even suggested increased security to prevent them from coming back. But that wasn't enough. I filed for a restraining order against Mike and my parents. When they found out, their reaction was exactly what I expected. My mom called mutual friends and relatives, claiming I was mentally unstable and blowing things out of proportion. They even hired an expensive lawyer to challenge the order. In court, they tried to frame it as just a family dispute. We just want to talk to our son, my mom cried to the judge. This is so unfair. We're his family. But I had evidence. I presented text messages where they had threatened me and videos of their scenes outside my office. The judge wasn't buying their excuses. The restraining order will remain in effect, he said. It was a relief, but it didn't feel like a victory. I knew my parents and Mike wouldn't stop trying to wreak havoc in my life. I thought things would settle down after the court order was issued. I started to regain a sense of normalcy, going to work, meeting friends, and even returning to the gym. Working out became my safe space, a way to release the stress that still lingered. I'd put on my favorite playlist, pop in my earbuds, and lose myself in the rhythm of the weights. But one evening, that sense of peace shattered. It was a typical night. I had just finished warming up and was about to do bench presses when I noticed a familiar face in the mirror. Mike. He stood by the door, wearing that smug, self-satisfied grin that always made my blood boil. I couldn't believe it. The restraining order clearly stated he wasn't allowed to come near me. I tried to focus on my workout, hoping he'd leave, but instead, he walked over and stood uncomfortably close, pretending it was just a coincidence. I told myself to ignore him, but of course, Mike wasn't the kind of person to back down easily. Well, look who it is, he said as I racked the barbell. The family hero. How's life playing the victim? I took a deep breath and kept my mouth shut. I moved to another machine, but he followed. Why so quiet? He taunted. Come on, you're so righteous, but we both know who the real loser is here. I gritted my teeth and told myself, don't react. He's baiting you. But then he said the thing that broke me. You couldn't even keep your girl, he sneered, stepping closer. Sarah deserved better, and she got it. You should thank me for saving her from you. My fists clenched as I turned to him and said through gritted teeth, do you hear yourself? This isn't your gym. This isn't your life. Get out. Mike just smiled and leaned in. And what are you going to do? Hide behind your lawyers? I tried walking away, but he shoved me from behind. That was the last straw. I spun around and punched him. I didn't want to, but the anger overtook me. We started fighting right there in the gym. People scattered, shouting for us to stop. Mike swung back, but I landed another hit. Eventually, the gym staff pulled us apart. I was bleeding from my eyebrow, and my shoulder ached from where I had hit the bench. Mike, still grinning like an idiot, wiped blood from his mouth. You're going to regret this, he said, glaring at me. The next day, I got a notice that Mike had filed a countersuit against me, claiming I assaulted him. It was so predictable that I wasn't even surprised. His lawyer called mine, demanding compensation for physical and emotional damages. I clenched my teeth, staring at the bruise on my shoulder, a painful reminder of how far things had gone. This incident made it painfully clear. Mike would never stop. He was determined to ruin me, no matter the cost. The gym incident was the final straw. It was clear that my family, especially Mike, would never stop. I was done trying to salvage anything from this toxic mess. I made a decision. I would leave it all behind and start over. I was moving to Seattle. It wasn't an easy decision. Leaving meant cutting ties not only with Mike and my parents but also with the life I had built, even the good parts. I spent days sorting through my things, selling or donating most of them. By the time I packed the last box, it felt like I was shedding the weight of years of pain and disappointment. When I locked the door to my old apartment for the last time, I felt a bittersweet mix of relief and sadness, but I knew it was the right thing to do. After I announced my decision to move, something surprising happened. Emma, Sarah's sister, reached out to me. I'm so sorry for everything my sister did to you, she wrote in her first message. I didn't expect anyone from Sarah's family to take my side, but Emma proved to be an ally. When we spoke, she apologized repeatedly for Sarah's actions and explained that even she had been shocked by what Sarah had done. She made a terrible mistake, Emma said, but Mike manipulated her. He used every insecurity she had. Emma even offered to help with my move, but I politely declined. I needed to do this on my own. To my surprise, Sarah's parents also reached out. They sent me a heartfelt letter expressing their shock and disappointment at what had happened. We can't justify her actions, they wrote, but we want you to know we always thought you were a good man. We're sorry for the pain this has caused you. Their words were unexpected but deeply comforting. For the first time in a long time, I felt like not everyone around me was trying to tear me down. My cousin Amy also stepped in. She had seen the favoritism my parents showed Mike her entire life and wasn't afraid to call it out. This was bound to happen eventually, Amy posted on social media. Years of enabling and favoritism created a monster. Amy's public post helped sway some of the relatives who had initially taken my parents' side. She became my voice in conversations where I could no longer participate. Her unwavering support meant more to me than she probably realized. One of the most unexpected moments came when Sarah herself reached out to me. Her message was long, starting simply, "I know you probably hate me, but I need to apologize." She admitted that Mike had manipulated her insecurities and played on her doubts. She explained how he had initially been there for her and made her feel seen, only to slowly convince her that I didn't appreciate her. "I was stupid and weak," she wrote. "I know I ruined everything, and I have no excuse for it." She ended by saying she hoped I could find happiness, even if it wasn't with her. I stared at her message for a long time. Part of me felt a sense of closure, but I also knew her words couldn't undo the damage. I replied briefly, "I wish you the best, but I can't have anything more to do with you." Breaking ties with my family was the hardest decision I've ever made. I spent weeks wrestling with it, replaying childhood memories and moments when we still felt like a family. But every time I thought about their actions over the past few months, siding with Mike, dismissing my pain, showing up at my workplace, I knew there was no other way. Cutting ties felt like performing surgery without anesthesia. Excruciating but necessary. I stopped responding to their messages, blocked their numbers, and even deleted old photos to stop myself from waking up with that gnawing bitterness. It was my way of taking back control of my life. Seattle became my sanctuary. I found a small, cozy apartment with large windows that looked out onto a quiet park. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed to rebuild myself. At my new job, I met people who didn't know anything about my past or the chaos I had left behind. Their kindness and genuine interactions reminded me that not every relationship comes with strings or manipulation. Slowly, I started trusting again. I even began attending work events, something I used to avoid like the plague. It felt good to be part of a group where I wasn't judged or compared to anyone else. One day, while walking through the city, I passed an animal shelter. I don't know what made me stop, but something told me to go inside. That's where I met Max, a big, slightly clumsy Labrador with shaggy fur and soulful eyes that melted my heart. The moment he walked over, wagged his tail, and sat at my feet, I knew he was coming home with me. Max quickly became my rock. On the tough days when memories of my family or Sarah crept back, he was there, wagging his tail, nudging my hand for pets, or flopping down on my lap like a big goofball. He reminded me that happiness could be simple and healing was possible. Through this entire journey, I realized that family doesn't have to be defined by blood. Family is made up of the people who respect you, support you, and value you for who you are, not for what you can do for them. Therapy helped me let go of the guilt and self-doubt that had weighed me down for so long. I stopped blaming myself for my parents' favoritism or Mike's behavior. Their actions weren't my fault, and I didn't have to carry their burden anymore. I also learned to set boundaries and prioritize my own well-being. Walking away from toxic relationships wasn't easy, but it was the only way to truly find peace. Now, when I look back, I have no regrets. Yes, it was painful to cut ties with my family, but it was also the most liberating decision of my life. I've built a new life where I'm surrounded by positivity and people who genuinely care. Max and I spend weekends exploring the trails around Seattle, and I've started to feel a sense of joy I hadn't experienced in years. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and that's what matters.